everybody. I'm back. It's been a hell of a week. If you're not following me on Twitter, you really should, because when I'm not posting videos, I am updating you on life shit so that you know what's going on. So you really should check me out on Twitter. I'll link it in little, I have been in quarantine this week. Yay. My husband tested positive for COVID on Tuesday night. So because we live together, my work automatically made me quarantine, and also I started feeling sick too, so I was pretty sure I was going to get COVID too. I go back to work tomorrow. I just tested this morning, still negative. I think I can breathe a sigh of relief that I'm going to be okay. But it really did throw a wrench in my life, because yesterday I actually was planning to go to a coffee shop. However, being on quarantine, it just didn't sit right with me. And also yesterday I started feeling kind of sick again, and I wasn't sure if I was getting sick, and just better to just lay low. Pretty sure I'm going to be paying it back for all my coworkers having to cover for me. So we'll see how things go. It might be a few weeks before I can get the coffee shop thing going, because my work schedule is just so hectic, and it requires me to commute and drive to all these places, and I need a day off to do that. While I'm here, I just want to get that all out of the way. You know me, I like to do my housework and then hop into the video. So today's video is on 6 of my top classics. Now, I want to say something before I get into these classics. They are my favorite, not because they're good. Well, no, they're good. They're good. They're good in their own way. We'll get it. It'll make sense as this goes on. But they were impactful in my life. They shaped me as a person. They really changed things for me. They introduced something. They taught me something. It stuck with me, or it gives me, this. One book in particular is like, it gives me the feels, the feel goods. You'll know which one it is when I announce it. Trust me, you'll know, because you guys are going to think I'm like a wretched, depressed soul. I swear I'm not. But these books made such an impact. I could not look away, and it just really sparked something in me. So I wanted to share that with you, but there is a disclaimer. There is one book in particular that I'm going to explain very differently than you think I'm going to. So just stay tuned for that. So kind of trying to hook you in a little. Hope it worked. Okay. This book has never left my soul since the day I read it. And that was Night by Ellie Weasel. Oh my God. It's the shortest book, and it is the most impactful book. I read this when I was a teenager, and I think we were doing a Holocaust study, and I read it, and I swear I read it in like one sitting, which, I mean, not hard to do. This is really a quick, impactful read. It's a true story about his survival at Auschwitz. And I don't think I need to say much else about this book, but it follows his journey through the camp. And obviously it's not lighthearted or fun in any shape or form, but it just stuck with me. It just opened my eyes to things that have happened in history that are horrible. And I would think, how did this happen? Why did this happen? It opened my mind up to wanting to know more about the evils that people are capable of. And this book is just so impactful to me. I don't reread it very often because it's a lot, but I have reread this a couple of times, and it still has stood the test of time for me. I highly recommend it. All these books are difficult reads. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them are. But I still highly recommend them, because there's something to be said. There's something so amazing about a shift in perception about the world we live in. And this definitely did this to my teenage self, reading this book. I had no idea. This was my first look at the Holocaust. And I've read so many books since, and this one is still the top dog for me. So, Night, Ellie Weasel, check it out if you haven't. If you had, let's talk about it, because There is a lot to say in such a short novel. Am I right? Okay. Next book I'm going to talk about. I only read this once, and I'm going to tell you why. I was so familiar with the story. It was just this point in my life. It's like, do I even want to read the book now that I know so much about the story? Because there's so many adaptations and so many plays and so many references and other books and movies. It's like you feel like you've read it. And then one day I was like, I never actually read the book. And I was like, but I know the story. Should I read the book? And the answer was, yeah, you should read the book, dummy. So I did. I read this last year. Pride and Prejudice, or did I read it the year before? It was either, COVID has, I basically read this book recently, within the past 2 years. Let's just say that, okay. I finally read Pride and Prejudice, and I love this edition too. Isn't it beautiful? Can we just talk about beautiful book editions? Like, let's just, she's gorgeous. She's stunning. She's beauty. She is grace. She's beautiful. And like, listen, never read the book, seen the movies, love Keira Knightley's adaptation. It's beautiful, it's stunning, love it. Seen, you know, so many references like, hello, Bridget Jones' Diary. I've watched Bridget Jones' Diary like 1,000 times and never read the book, but knew it was based off of this. So I finally read it and it was just, I was shocked. So the thing with Jane Austen is I'm always shocked because I've read a few of her books. And I'm always shocked at how accessible her writing really is. Like, she's so snarky, she's dry humored. Like, I'm sitting there reading her book and I'm chuckling and I'm like, Jane, we could be friends. Like, you and I could probably get along fabulously. She's so snarky and I don't know. I love her. I love her. She's amazing to me. And I love the characters she creates. They're just, you feel like you know them. And so what I like, so like I said, I've read a few of her books, but this one is definitely my favorite for obvious reasons. I just love the hate to love trope. And I feel like it's so good in this book, but I also love like, it's kind of it kind of transports you back and you kind of learn about like society and England and like there's like this the thing I liked about the book is like the whole time I'm like, are the Bennets poor? But they seem rich. But are they poor? And it actually, no, they're like poor rich. And it's such a weird, so like it's like such a privilege book, you know? So like I said, like it's very white privilege. Poor little rich girl. But literally, yes. Like Elizabeth Bennet is kind of hanging by a thread. Like she could be destitute and be wealthy at the same time. It was just crazy to me. I was just fascinated by that aspect of the book. And I love how Mr. Darcy is so like snarky and I hate him in the beginning. I'm like, you just think you're so great. And there's so many other side characters like Mr. Collins. Oh my God. Can we just talk about how much I hate Mr. Collins? Like I hated him. Like I swear, I almost threw this book a few times, but I was like, she is beauty, she is grace, cannot throw this book. But it's just like these characters are so well developed that you know them. It's just crazy. It's so good. It's so amazing. I don't know what more I can say. Like I'm sure everyone and their mother has read this book by now, seen adaptations. I mean, if you've seen Bridget Jones' Diary, you get the gist of the book. It's fabulous. So I'm glad I read it. I want to reread it because like the first time through for me with Jane Austen, like I actually do need to read Jane Austen books like several times to fully get everything. But the thing is that her books are really accessible. So I love that because it takes place in like the 1806 or something. So it's like, I'm not going to relate to anything that happened back then, but you are because she makes these characters so real. And that's what I love about her. Like she's so good what she does. And even though she writes about privileged white people, it's still incredible because you can relate to these people on one level or another. And these characters are just like your own, like, you know them. And I love that. So I've said that several times. So I think we can move on. Can we? Yeah. Okay, great. Pride and Prejudice. If you haven't read it, come on now. And if you're like me and you're like, I've seen so much that I don't feel like I need to read the book, you do. You do, because it's just like, it's a whole other journey, okay? So Pride and Prejudice, yes. Okay, next book I want to talk about is picking a favorite from this author. So he, by far, is one of my favorite authors of all time, like my favorite classic authors. He's my go-to. He never disappoints. I've visited all the places he's written about, and it's brought this whole other perspective onto me about his life and his legacy. And I'm talking about John Steinbeck, you guys. I am a huge John Steinbeck fan. I've been to Selena's, I've been to his house, I've been to Monterey, I've been to Cannery Row, it's so crazy when you're driving around the Selena's area and you see the fields and sometimes you see the workers out there, and it's just like you step into that book. But reading John Steinbeck, for me, he just brings this time and place of like the Depression era. He brings so much life into it, and he makes you feel like you're there. And the first book I read by his was Of Mice and Men. It was obviously required for school, and I loved that book. Like, I reread it like several times. I just fell in love with that book. It was just so like, whoa. Like, I think the thing is too, it's like same thing with Jane Austen. Like, I thought I'm not gonna be able to relate to this book. I'm not gonna like anything about this book. It's written in the 30s, or what am I gonna be able to relate to? And the fact is no, there was just, the characters felt so real to me. Like, I could relate. It was such a relatable thing. And it was funny too, because I would have discussions about the Depression with my grandfather, who actually lived through the Depression. And we'd have talks about what it was like to live during that time. And it was so fascinating to me. And then I could go and turn to John Steinbeck and read a book about it and then talk to my grandpa. And that's why he made such an impact in my life. Like, I felt a lot closer to my grandfather during this time too, which is another reason, like, it's not necessarily the book itself. It's the emotions that are invoked from reading the book, because it prompted me to be like, oh, my grandpa was alive during this time. He's the closest thing I have. Let's talk to my grandfather and see what it was like to live back then. And my grandpa would tell me these crazy stories about riding the rails and not having any money and not having any food and all this crazy stuff. And I'm like, what? What did you do? You were hopping on trains? What? Grandpa. And he's like talking about, like, during this time, like, I just had to, it was best for my family if they didn't have to support me. So reading John Steinbeck makes me think about my grandfather. So like I said, it's not always necessarily the book, but the emotions that come with it. And I think it also made it more real when I actually went down to Selena's and Monterey, and just, it's such a beautiful part of the country. I totally recommend it. But the book I'm recommending, or the book that's my actual absolute top-notch favorite John Steinbeck, and it's a little controversial, and honestly, I could care less. And I'll explain the controversy if you're not aware, but it's Travels with Charlie. Van life, okay? Why? He absolutely puts into words the reason I love exploring the United States. And I think all of us should explore the United States, because if you're watching this video and you're from another country, traveling from state to state can almost feel like traveling to another country. Honestly, every part of the country does things differently. And the reason I like this book is he basically travels in a van with his dog, Charlie. Oh, I love that part too. Travels across America, meets people, has these moments, and there's always these quirky, cute moments with his dog. He names his truck after Don Quixote's horse. Oh my God, I can never pronounce it correctly. I'll just insert it because I'll butcher it anyways. I know I butcher it. And I love the fact that he names it after, like, this epic journey novel Don Quixote. It really says everything. Now, for the controversies, some of the controversies are that these interactions he had with people he met across the country aren't real, and that the story itself is actually fake because a lot of the stuff couldn't have actually happened. I don't care. I don't care. I love this book. It doesn't have to me, it doesn't read to me like a memoir anyways, even though it's supposed to be a memoir of this road trip he took in 1960 across the United States. Now, the reason I love it is just how he writes different parts of the country. And he just highlights the reason I love visiting other parts of the country and the reason I want to visit all the 50 states. He touches in on like social issues, like this is the election year, Kennedy's up for president, the civil rights movement's getting underway. There's so much turmoil in this country that he captures into this book. It's amazing. But one of my favorite parts of this book, because, you know, I love Monterey and he visits California, he stays with some friends, but then as he leaves, he like says his goodbye. Like he knows he's never gonna come back. And it's so touching because it's like, oh my God. Like he knows he's not gonna live forever, and he knows he's getting older and he's getting on in age and he doesn't have much time left. And he feels like this is his last time he's gonna see where he was born and raised. And it hit me so hard. It's just amazing that it's to the point where like, real or not, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. This is just a great book, period. It can be an autobiography, it can be a fable, but if you read it, just enjoy the ride. Don't worry if it's real or not, just enjoy the ride. And if I'm to be honest, which like I said, I really don't care, but I guess if I have to say, I think it's part true and part false. And I still don't care. I love this book. It's the best. It's the absolute best. It's like, if you're interested in van life, like shit, pick this up. Now, it's not going to be like Cheryl Strayed's Wild or Into the Wild. It's not that dramatic. Not even close. But it's so good. Like he gets what's going on in the world, in the country during this time. Like he gets it. He puts it into words, and it's easy to understand, it's easy to digest, and I flew through this, I've read this a couple times, I love it, kind of want to reread it. So, okay. I'm just gonna introduce it, because The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. Holy shit. Okay, so I picked this book up because I went to visit Chicago in 2018. Me and my sister, we took a trip to Chicago and I fell in love with Chicago. One of the things I learned about when I was there was obviously the Industrial Revolution, but this thing that really stuck with me was when I was on this boat tour, and the tour guide was talking about how the river, I forget the name of the river in Chicago. Doesn't matter. The river in Chicago. I only went to Chicago once, you guys. Come on, give me a break. You're like, you don't know the river? No, I was only there once for a couple days. I'm sorry. And they were talking about how the river was on fire from animal fat. And then the guy said, if you want to know more, read The Jungle. And I was like, okay, challenge accepted. I read this book. Okay, let me tell you guys. While I was reading this book, so many times I wanted to just put it down and walk away and wash my brain, because what I was reading was shocking. It was shocking. Whoo! Holy shit. So many times. And I was listening to it on audiobook, so I think if I just read it, I would have walked away. But because I was listening to it and reading along, like I literally was sitting here reading along and listening to it. And it really was it was really good for me to do that. I'm glad I did it, because I would have never finished it if I just sat here and read it, because I would have been like, nope, this is nasty. It basically talks about the working conditions in the meatpacking industry in Chicago around the turn of the century. And it follows the main character. Oh my God, he's from Latvia, I believe. Oh, I'm never gonna be able to say his name. Once again, we'll just insert it because I'll butcher it for sure. And it discussed like the conditions in the meatpacking industry, what it's like to work there, what goes in the meat. Oh my God, spoiler alert, it's disgusting. And there's scenes like where he's working in a Chicago winter, okay? We've all heard about these winters in Chicago. I've heard about them. I'm not sure I want to experience them. And he's literally talking about how animal blood is frozen to him. And you're just like, what? It's just, and it's literally survival of the fittest. And it's disgusting. The whole book, you will get, I mean, there was a few times like they would describe things and I would literally have to hit pause because I was gagging. It was so foul. And you're like, but it's your favorite? Yeah, it's my favorite. Not in the way you think. It's my favorite because it stuck with me. It invoked emotions. It made me think. It took me out of my day-to-day life and inserted me into this day-to-day reality. That was in fact a very real reality for so many people during this time that I can't ignore that. Like I have to experience it. And I felt like I was there alongside the character in these meatpacking, and just like he would always, and the thing that made me so sad was how he's always trying to just like, if I just get some more money, we'll be okay. And it's never gonna happen. It's awful. Now, the cool thing about this book too is it invoked a lot of legislation, and there were now, you know, inspectors in the plant, and it wasn't so sketchy anymore. Your meat wasn't sketchy like the shit. You think your food might be bad now. That's nothing, honey. Listen, let me tell you what's in the meat back in the day. Okay, you think it might be sketchy now? Yes, okay, it is. We've come a long way. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So I just love what he did. I appreciate him for what he did because it needed to be told. Like this story has to be told. You have to read it. You have to know it's going to be tough. It's going to be difficult. You're going to walk away. You're probably going to get nauseous as all get out. And that's okay. That's part of the experience. That's to be expected. This book, oh. And the fact that Upton Sinclair worked undercover in a meat plant for 2 months to gather information, and his whole goal was to expose the conditions of the worker. And what ended up happening was it exposed what was going into your meat. And he was like, I was aiming for your heart and I hit your stomach. And I'm like, yeah. All the characters, they're hard workers, they're salt of the earth, and they're disposable. And it's so hard to read about. It's so hard, but I'm so glad I did. So like I said, sometimes branching out and reading things that are difficult is important to emotional growth. So do give it a go, but no, it's not going to be an enjoyable experience. Moving on. I have not read this book in a long time, but it was one of those books that I just loved. It's amazing. It's A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And look at this cover. I got this, I still remember where I bought this book. I bought this in Leavenworth, Washington, and was the first time I ever saw one of these editions. And I was like, this is so cute. And I love this book. I loved this book so much because number one, Brooklyn is amazing. And this book takes place at the turn of the century as well. It's a daughter of parents of immigrants in Brooklyn, and they're poor. Her name is Francine, and her dad is the son of an immigrant from Ireland, and then Francine's mom is the daughter of an immigrant from Austria, and they live in Brooklyn, and they're poor, and it's her mom, her dad, and her brother, and it's a coming of age story. Nothing happens in the book. It's just a coming of age, but everything happens. It's so And it's like every other book I've ever read. It's so accessible. It's so relatable. It's all these feelings, and it's all about like being part of this melting pot that we've learned about in school, and actually reading and stepping into someone else's experience during this time frame. And of course, it's before women could vote, and there's a lot of, she's very strong-willed. She likes to read books, and like some of my favorite scenes is her sitting out on her fire escape reading a book, and you're just like, you can just visualize it. I also loved her father. Oh my God, I loved her father so much. And he was an alcoholic, but it was just, he was such a touching human being. And it's just all the relationships she cultivates. You know, her relationship with her mom is very different from her relationship with her dad and her relationship with her brother. And it's all very interesting. And there's so much life in this book. Like, once again, it's like, you know, these people, like these characters are so well developed that it just sucks you in, and it doesn't have to be about anything. It's like, it's just the life of somebody else that you're experiencing. And that's what I love so much about this book. I could relate to Francine on so many levels. Like, she was just so feisty. And I was like, I love that. I love your feistiness. And I love how she grew up and how she became an adult, and every experience it was, even though it was turn of the century, still, I was like, yup, I relate. I love this book so much, even though I've never lived in Brooklyn. I wasn't even born during this time. I mean, this was even before my grandparents' time, and I could still relate to everything that she was going through. It was just amazing. This book, had to see it. Yeah. Last but not least, this one's the controversial one. Number 1, I'm just gonna say it, To Kill Mockingbird. Now listen. I like this book for many reasons. One, the characters are very interesting. It's probably the least relatable book to me out of all the books I've read here. This one I probably relate to the least. But honestly, it's such a interesting look at a period of time. And it taught, you know, obviously it's been banned in schools, which once I really think about it, I don't understand why this book is banned, because it's kind of complicit to racism. And I know I'm saying some controversial shit, but listen, hear me out. There's a lot of complicity to racism. Like when Scout asks Atticus about she asks him about the N-word, and he's like, oh, he essentially goes, oh, it doesn't mean anything. And you're like, here's your moment, Atticus, to tell her how hurtful this word is. And you just kind of downplay it a little, which is fascinating. It's a fascinating look into racism, systemic racism. I highly recommend this book, but I recommend it only that you read it knowing what you know, to see how things kind of get overlooked. And even though what Atticus is doing is essentially good, it's just kind of like his motives behind. So basically, for those of you who don't know the story, it's through the eyes of the Girl Scout. She's a tomboy, which I love that. I do like Scout. I like her a lot. I love her innocence, and I love her outlook on the world, and I do like it, and I like Atticus. Like, there's some really quotable moments, but I like to think of these quotable moments and like to elevate them to my own standards. So I do have a quote, but honestly, it's a standard that I want to live to that I don't feel that Atticus actually lived up to at all. So Atticus is always like, try to understand the points of views. When he says crawl, live in someone else's skin, he's kind of referring to white people, whereas that's a moment for you to actually try to live in someone else's skin. And he kind of apologizes for racism a little bit, like, oh, try to understand where they're coming from. And honestly, you read the book and you're like, why? Why do I need to understand where a racist is coming from? No, I don't need to understand where a racist is coming from. it's like, for me, it's like that lofty idea of American History X where he gets reformed, but I can never get past the fact of the act he committed. I don't care that Daniel Vineyard got reformed in prison. He still did a heinous act, and he's still an unforgivable character to me. It's the same thing. It's one of my favorites because I've had such interesting experiences over the years reading it. Like every time I read it, it hits me absolutely differently. And I reread this in 2020 because Sissy Spacek, who is, in my opinion, really good at audiobooks. Any book that is narrated by Sissy Spacek, I'm on it. Cool, sounds good. But when I read this, it hit me so differently that I still appreciate the work behind it. I still appreciate, I think it's a little hyped, but it still means a lot to me. This book still means a lot to me. It still teaches me things that I didn't see before, that I see through a fresh set of eyes. So if you have read it, maybe reread it and try to look at it from a different perspective other than, you know, Atticus is out doing this good thing when he's actually, he took the case because he didn't want the NAACP to come to town, and like, why would that have been so bad, Atticus? What's wrong with the NAACP? You know, but I do think it's a good snapshot into what happens when we just kind of let things happen and we kind of shoo it off like everyone's fighting their own battle. Well, is that an okay stance to take on racism? No. Should we just excuse it if someone changes, like in American History X? Well, Daniel Vineyard, he reformed himself, so that thing he did to that kid on the curb, totally forgivable. No, I absolutely will not forgive him. Never. I will never forgive him for that. I don't care what kind of goods you brought. You still did this thing. You're still not, I don't know. It's complicated with me. Like it's very complicated. I think it's complicated for everyone. And I think that's why everyone should read it, to see where it hits you. Because for everyone, it's going to hit you differently. But another thing that's really interesting too is like Atticus is like the hero of the story, but he's not really a hero, and nothing changes. Like the crime is this white woman accuses a black man of rape. The black man didn't do it. She was just attracted to him, and he could have been, you know, it was like a lynching. And like nothing changed though. No one changed. Everything's going to still continue. Like black men are still going to be accused of rape when they didn't commit it or whatever, you know, like I kept thinking of Emmett Till, you know, and it's like nothing changed. So what did this book teach us? Except what happens when we just sit back and wait for someone else to take care of things, or should we take care of things ourselves? And I think honestly, it's all in how you present a book. I think a book can still be good, even if it has problems, because it can still have very teachable moments. And there's still ways we can teach children about this book. And I don't think it needs to be completely cast aside. No. It's beautifully written. It's good to teach kids about, you know, literature. There's a lot of teachable moments in this book, but on a social standpoint, it's bad. So I hope I'm making sense. I'm not trying to spark some fight. I'm just saying what I've learned about myself and this book and reading it. And I hope my example of American History X kind of teaches, you know, kind of helps translate how I'm feeling, but it is still one of my favorites of all time. I just love how this book changes every time I read it. My experience with the book changes every time. Like I remember one time I read it on the Gulf of Mexico in Alabama, and I was reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and it hit me so differently then after I'd come off of a big civil rights tour, and as to now after reading it after 2020 and everything that I had learned since and how differently it hit me. And that I'm truly grateful for. I'm truly grateful that I can still be teachable, and I can still look at something and see it differently. And only another book that did that for me was Catcher in the Rye. Like, I loved that as a teenager. I read it as an adult, absolutely hated it. It's interesting. Which I'm not even going to mention Catcher in the Rye, and I've read that book like 3 or 4 times just to see, do I still hate it? Oh yeah, I still hate it. You know, so anyways, those are my 6 books. That is it for me today. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you learned something. Hope you found a book that maybe you want to check out now. And yeah, I think these books all have something to offer that's very important. So with that, everyone have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.